All right, hello, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about music education and where you or how you should determine where you should go to music school as a undergraduate or even graduate student. And this is not a recommendation video. Sadly enough, I'm not going to be sitting here in the chair saying to you what you should or shouldn't do or where you can and can't go or what program's better than the other program. I'm not going to do any of that. So it's going to be very agnostic of where you should go institutionally. So the conversation we're going to have today is more about the questions you should ask yourself before embarking on a rigorous study of music. So the first question you should ask yourself is, what kind of musician are you? It's a very obvious question, but I don't think it's a question that is often really thought about by a student who just wants to study music. So there are two buckets of students, generally speaking. There are people who've had a formal music education, so that by the time they get to the university level, they are ready to go. They have a very strong understanding of how to read music. Maybe they write music. They're usually classically trained. They can play other genres of music, but they have a real strong kind of Western classical music education that involves being able to read, being able to improvise, knowing the repertoire that's commonly played in any kind of wind ensemble at the college level, or orchestra at the college level, chamber group, or jazz group at the college level. And there's a focus, if we want to just divide that group into two parts. There's the music education focus. So these are people who are really passionate about music education. They want to be band directors. They want to be music educators. And then there is the group of people who want to be performers. They want to play music. And then there are subcategories of that, which you find are composers, composition majors, and then music therapy. And so that's the basic university. Most universities offer programs in these disciplines, in these categories. And what's great about going to a university, a big university that has a music department in it, is you can double major. You can major in pre-med in music if you're that driven and you want to have absolutely no life. You can major in history and music. You can minor in music. You can major in business. There's so many tracks that you can follow within a traditional university setting. But the initial question you have to ask yourself is, what is my experience playing music, and what am I hoping to evolve into as an artist? It's a very important question. So if you're a music performer and you really want to perform, then you want to go to a school that offers ensembles. You want to go to a school that has a really great teacher, and you want to go to a school that is in an environment where there are lots of opportunities to play outside of the school. So that's another huge issue. So, you're talking like New York City, you're talking like maybe Los Angeles. That's more of a contemporary music scene. You're talking about some places in the Midwest, Chicago being one of them. And those are the places that'll give you a lot of opportunity to play. So there's that piece of it. Then there's the music education piece, which I talked about a little bit before earlier in our discussion. And then there is the other group of people. Okay, so another group of students who want to study music are students who commonly don't have a real strong or rigorous background in traditional music education. So these are folks who might play in a rock band. They might play in some sort of church-based group, which can be very serious. And I've met a lot of brilliant musicians who've played in church choir bands, and I went to school with a lot of folks like that. But they may not necessarily have, the traditional classical background. And everybody else, basically, who's doing music in a situation which is not sort of driven by the more traditional, I don't want to say standards, but the traditional norms of what most universities are sort of dealing with in terms of incoming music students. All right. So if you're in that bucket, or if you're in that group, uh, you're I won't say your options are going to be more limited, but they're going to be you're going to have to think differently about where you're going to go to school, because in a traditional university that has traditional ensembles, the first thing they're going to have you do is audition, and they're going to have you sight read, and they're going to basically figure out if you can come into that major. So they're going to audition you to get into the major. And many, many music schools, many music programs, whether they're music colleges or universities, have an audition requirement. And that can determine whether or not you're going to be in attendance. For some people who can't read music really well, they may have incredible improvising ears, and they can play a seventh chord and they can just play over that. And there's exceptions to that reading rule based on the level of sort of tonal and harmonic development somebody may have coming into a situation like that. Or they may be somebody who writes music, and they've submitted songs that they've written, and the university's like, we have a songwriting department, which is not as common as what I had earlier mentioned, but they let folks into those programs. So the bottom line is there is a music program for every type of student and every type of musician. The important thing to understand is your own level of musical development before you start looking at music schools. And a great example of this, and I'm going to use myself as an example, and again, I'm not endorsing any of these schools. I'm just going to explain what happened to me and how I ended up doing what I'm doing now. So I was a classically trained musician, really proficient on the instrument, the clarinet, and I got music scholarships to a bunch of different schools. And for me, the initial impulse to go to school was having somewhere to go. My family didn't have a lot of money, and although I had music lessons and I was lucky to be in a public school system that had a great music program, the options were limited in terms of finances, in terms of where I could go to school. So it was really incumbent upon me to get and obtain a music scholarship, which I did do. So once I obtained a music scholarship, I went to the first school that gave me the biggest scholarship without really thinking a whole lot about if it was a good fit. And I showed up at the school. It's a very good university. It's called Ohio Wesleyan University. But I immediately, within the first 2 weeks, realized that the music department at that school wasn't a good fit for me. My desire was to be a symphonic musician, clarinetist in an orchestra. So my teacher, who I really, really admired for saying this, made a judgment call. He said to me, I don't know if this school's a really good school for you. I think you should maybe transfer to another school. And he had asked me, by the way, what other schools did you apply to? And I said, well, I applied to this other big university called Cleveland State University. And that school was not as fancy as Ohio Wesleyan, and I wasn't as impressed with its reputation. And he stopped me and he said, hold on a second. You had an opportunity to study classical music in Cleveland? And I said, yeah. And he said, who was the teacher? And I mentioned the teacher's name. His name is Theodore Johnson. And he said, he's the second chair of one of the best orchestras in the entire world, the Cleveland Orchestra. You've got to get out of here and study with that guy. It's just really important for you to leave and go. And so I made a really difficult decision, but I thought a lot about it, which is like, if I really want to be at a very high level as a symphonic musician, I need to dive deeper into that world. And I already knew a lot about that world, but I needed to know more. So I changed schools and I studied with him. Now, I worked at Cleveland State with Ted for a few years. I learned a tremendous amount about phrasing. So I already knew how to play all the notes, but I really wanted to learn how to better play the music. So that's another key component to ask yourself, is the source material that you have is going to really determine your success at the university you're going to be going to. So I had a lot of source material as a clarinetist. I really knew what I was doing as a musician, at least I thought. And Ted just really got me in shape. He was like having a Olympic coach working with a somewhat gifted athlete, me, and he well established, very accomplished, etc. So Ted really taught me how to play music better. But then, of course, I realized that's not what I wanted to do. So I had all this musical ambition, but I didn't know where to put it. But I had a tacit interest in music production, which then grew into a greater interest in music production, which ultimately landed me at Berklee College of Music. Now, at Berklee, it wasn't about classical music. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It was about production, engineering, and some film scoring. But what I learned at Berklee was all that other stuff that I knew how to do really, really well served me incredibly well at that school because I was an asset to the school. So the other question you have to ask yourself is, are you going to be an additive component to the school? Are you bringing skills that are going to be appreciated to the school? And that's a very difficult question, and it can be a humbling question. But that's another really great question to ask yourself. Your experience at the university is going to be much better, or the college, or wherever you go, if you are seen as somebody who has something to add to the culture of the institution. So that's another, and culture, I mean the educational sort of philosophy of the institution. So at Berklee, I was kind of this like producer engineer person who also had this like extensive classical background. So that really helped me bridge into different areas at Berklee. And it wasn't so much a jazz experience, even though I did play jazz at the school. People were always asking me if I could play on their scores. People were asking me if I could participate in their projects because of the instrumental uniqueness that I brought. So that's another powerful thing. Deciding whether or not you're going to be a big fish by virtue of just being somebody who's doing something different than what everybody else is doing at the school. So those are other questions to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out where you should go to school. So music school isn't about, I'm going to go to this school so I can become this. Music school is about, I'm going to go to school and it's going to help me evolve into a better version of what I already am. And that's a really great way to think about music school. So it always comes back to self-knowledge. It always comes back to understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at, and what you can actually get better at and what might actually be beyond where you're at. And so that was another really great thing, is I realized early in my career what I was really, really good at as a musician. And that was the template that brought me forth into where I'm at today. So I'm a real big believer in musicianship. And that's a pretty big indicator as to how successful you're going to be as a composer, as a producer, as an engineer, as a songwriter. There's a musical quality, there's a language that you should really understand well before you make a choice about where you want to go. And the language that they're talking at that institution should be similar to the language of music that you're already familiar with. Unless, of course, you really want to dive deep into a completely different world and you want to learn something completely maybe beyond where you're at. And that's fine too. But it's not a transactional relationship in the way that you go to the store and you buy something. It's a relationship that's often fraught with peril because it's really being driven by your own talent and what you're capable of. So what I'm saying here is understand yourself before you make decisions about where you should go, and really think about what it is that you're really good at and how you can learn how to do that thing better. And that's a really great way to sort of look at music school, especially if you're not in the traditional performance or in the traditional music education roles. So it's very important to think about these things. If you have comments about what I've been talking about for the last however many minutes we've been together today, I would appreciate you sending them to me. If I haven't provided you with any clarity on your decision, again, this is agnostic of institutions. I'm not talking about where you should go. I'm just talking about what questions you need to really ask yourself. Common questions I ask students all the time, especially when I teach film scoring, is what are they listening to? What are you listening to? And I have often found the students who tend to do well in the very compositionally driven classes have two principal ingredients. They have strong musical skills and they have a willingness and an adaptability to listen to things that are just outside of what they normally listen to, and then really learn how to love those things. So again, there are so many different angles to this, and I don't want to discourage anybody from the kind of discovery that you need to go through, but I also don't want to give you bad information, i.e., go to this school because it's great. I just don't think that way when it comes to a music education. You know, it's kind of like, you know, would you go to Harvard for music performance? Probably not, because it's not known for having a good music program. But there are so many schools that you would normally not think of that have really brilliant sort of teachers, that have really great philosophies and have a great track record with producing, you know, pretty incredible. And they don't produce them, they just enhance what's already there. And I want to make that really abundantly clear. The music school will not make you into anything great. It will just take you and show you how to do things. And so you really have to figure out what that is before you can go to step 2, which is finding out how to do what you do better. So have a great day, and I will see everybody in a few weeks.